the 2022 Ford Ranger Wildtrak, and I've got it here on our off-road proving ground to see if it's any better than some stiff competitors from Isuzu with the Isuzu D-Max X-Terrain or the Nissan Navara Pro 4X Warrior. This Ranger here has the 4-cylinder bi-turbo diesel engine under the bonnet. There is a diesel V6 variant that I'm hoping to test later on, but this one here is probably going to be one of the more popular models until the V6 supply increases. Now, the Ford Ranger Wildtrak with the 4-cylinder model is priced just below $70,000. Now, what are you getting? Well, this is this iconic Wildtrak paint that you see here. I do like our LED daytime running lights with our LED headlamps, which do corner as well, quite nice. And I really do like the look here with this grille. So this has got like a metallic gray look. You have your big Ford blue oval up at the front. So it's looking very American, very shrunken down F-150. Now down below, we do have some silver accenting, which is a bit of like an off-roading theme. And then under here, we do have a metal skid plate underneath this little plastic aero piece. Now we have 18-inch alloy wheels, both front and rear. I do like the shadow sort of color that you have here, and also the fact that the Ford logo is not blue. It's again in theme with the wheels, so it doesn't stand out too much. Nice big large side mirrors with cameras inbuilt. I do like these roof rails up here as well. They feel nice, and I do like that silver accenting that sort of is themed from front all the way to the back. We do have keyless entry and exit, a nice side step as well, but this isn't really anything for sort of skidding along rocks because it's made of plastic, unlike the one we saw on the Ford Ranger Raptor. And then underneath you can see your leaf springs, but then yes, it is worth noting this ute has 4 disc brakes all around. It doesn't have any drums on the rear. Now, I really like the attention to detail here at the rear. I like how Ford is written into the rear flaps here at the back. It just looks quite cool. And also something that this has that the Ranger Raptor doesn't have are these side steps built into the rear tray here, which makes it a lot easier to step up and get things out of the back. Really clever, and I do like that inclusion and how well it's done. Now, rear taillights have blind spot monitoring and radars put into them, which is very useful for a car that is this long, and I do like the rear taillight design as well. And of course, we have everything that we need to control a trailer here at the rear. This rear tray actually locks with the central locking, which is just so useful, meaning that if you forget to lock your tray, it's not going to be a problem because it's going to lock with the rest of the car. Now, unlocking it, it's pretty simple. You can go ahead and just pull this down. It's nice and light, so even if you accidentally drop it, it won't cause a massive ruckus. You can either use the key, a button from the inside of the car, or a button on the inside of the tray, and you can go ahead and do 2 presses and it will slide automatically back. Check that out. How cool is that? I mean, like, I don't know, this is like so cool to me because I really like seeing innovations here in the rear trays of modern day utes here in Australia, and that's just so clever. And you know, it makes life a lot easier. Now, if you forget to close it, for example, you don't have to even get out of your ute. You can press that button and it closes automatically. Now, getting into the back, like I mentioned, is pretty easy thanks to these side steps. And once we're in here, we have a nice big amount of space. Now, of course, having this hard rolling cover can be a bit of a problem because it sort of eats up into your space a tiny bit, but to be honest, it's still very nice and wide, nice and flat. It doesn't really have that same bed liner that we saw in the Ford Ranger Raptor. This one's just a little bit different, but it still feels quite sturdy. We do have a auxiliary port here at the back. It's 180 watts, but it's only through a 12-volt socket, which is like those cigarette lighters, which again, I would have liked to have seen an actual AC plug like they have in the Ford F-150. And then we have a button to close this cover here at the back. Plenty of other tie-down points in here as well, so it's a very practical rear load space. And then, like I mentioned, because this thing has leaf springs, so it's designed to take on a bit more payload than the Ford Ranger Raptor, it can also tow up to 3.5 ton. The ergonomics of the interior is really quite nice, but let's start with what's going on from top to bottom. At the top here, we have these auxiliary blank switches, which you can go ahead and, you know, toggle, and they're going to not do anything until you put some accessories on this car. Now, the materials around here are a little bit tough, which isn't out of the ordinary for a ute in this sort of price range, but I do like the extra little bits of material, which yes, are a bit squidgy, like they like these squidgy materials around the top of the doors and around the door handles here on the center console and the seats, and just around the glove box as well, with some nice color match stitching to the exterior, which obviously goes along with the Wildtrak badge coloring as well, which is printed on the inside of this ute. yeah, it's a nicely sort of trimmed interior. But we do have those same practical elements like the little storage above the glove box, the little shelf above that as well, and then obviously our glove box down below. And also in terms of storage, we do have some side pockets, but they're not really big enough for my large water bottle. Rather, that has to live here in the center storage, which does squeak a little bit, which is fine because it's sort of squeaking against the seat there. Now, this large screen in the middle is so useful. The vertical placement makes this thing feel leagues ahead of anything in the dual cab mid-size ute segment. We also do have some little grab handles here as well, just in case things get a little bit too hairy, but we also have another grab handle up here as well. Now, we do have a Bang & Olufsen sound system, which sounds excellent. It's one of the best sound systems I've tested in any utes this year. So yes, kudos to Ford putting some actual nice decent speakers inside their ute. We also do have our little brake controller here, which I like how it's fitted in here rather than feeling like something that's an afterthought. So that's quite nice. And our shifter also is trimmed with that sort of Wildtrak stitching, which is quite nice. Although we don't have any paddle shifters, instead you have to use these little buttons here on the shifter itself. Now we do have a little drive mode button down here, and we do have controls for our four-wheel drive system as well. And then we also have another off-road button, which is indicated by a little Ford Ranger going off-road here, and that jumps up on the screen to give you extra controls over your vehicle. Now these seats are so comfortable. I really do like the finishing on them, although I'm just a little bit perplexed by this little ribbed material here in the front towards the middle. Now they are electronic, which is quite good on both sides, so major plus points for Ford on that. Now you can go ahead and fold these seats down as a bench here in the rear, which is quite useful, or you can actually fold up the seats themselves and reveal some additional storage, and also being able to get yourself some more interior storage space. Now all that locks away, so that's nice and safe. Jumping in, I also like how contoured these seats are in the back. They are a bit more upright, but I do have plenty of headroom. I have an okay amount of knee room, but these seats are sculpted so I get a bit more knee room that way, and I have an okay amount of feet room. Now we do have our own air vents back here and two USB ports, one USB-C and one USB Type A, which is all very useful. Some map pockets, some additional storage here in the rear of the doors, and we do have a nice little center armrest, which does have an interesting mechanism, which I'm not a big fan of, to be honest, because it's not so easy to open and close this thing for people who aren't familiar with it. But we do have additional cup holders in here, but they are a bit tough on your forearms because it's made of hard plastic and you're just sort of expecting this nice soft material all the way through. But yeah, it's not an awesome armrest thanks to that plastic there, but ultimately it is very comfortable here. And so if you're carrying around 4 people and you need to carry around all that stuff, it's going to be very nice to spend a lot of time back here. Now, the Ford Ranger Wildtrak is competing with the top of the range utes across the dual cab market. So we're looking at the Nissan Navara, we're also looking at the Isuzu D-Max X-Terrain, all those top of the range utes, because the Ranger Raptor sits above all of those, and then the Ranger Raptor sits below all the bigger full-size dual cab utes. So it's a bit of a complicated market at the moment, but to get an idea, this is traditionally what we know as the top of the range. So we have the most powerful bi-turbo 4-cylinder diesel under the bonnet, but you now can get a V6 diesel option now in the Wildtrak, which has a very big wait list because a lot of people are looking for more cylinders in their pickups. Now, driving around in this ute has been really quite pleasant. I love the technology this car has, and there's just so much going on in terms of making this feel like an excellent daily driver. And I've been using this as my daily driver for the past week. So I have safety systems, I have blind spot monitoring, rear cross traffic alert, a 360-degree parking camera, all very useful. I also have active steering and lane keep assist. I've also got radar cruise control, and there's a little thing in the digital instrument cluster here that tells me if I'm traveling too close to a car in front of me in bumper-to-bumper traffic, for example, so it helps try and prevent any of those rear-end collisions, which I'm very much appreciative of. Now, of course, what else is wildly useful is this giant touchscreen in the middle. It's very easy to operate, and just like what we found on the Ranger Raptor. Now, it's a bit unfair because I've stepped out of the best Ranger you can buy, which is the Ford Ranger Raptor, and I mean, it's something a bit more sensible. So this is narrower, sits lower, and it's obviously designed to tow a bit more than the Ranger Raptor because it's got leaf springs on the rear, and so that's quite an important thing to remember. So the leaf springs mean that, you know, when you don't carry anything in the back, it can get a bit bumpy, and by comparison, yes, it is a bit bumpier to ride around in than the Ranger Raptor, but compared to other utes that aren't made by Ford, it is extremely comfortable. And I did the fun test of jumping over some speed bumps, and I found that this thing stayed very composed even though I was carrying nothing in the back. Now look, if you're like me and have a bit of a phobia of leaf springs because of your previous experiences and just think they're a bit uncomfortable to ride around on day to day, well, fear no more, because the Ford Ranger does a really good job of offering a very composed ride out here on the road with leaf springs. This car has a very lofty type suspension, so it feels very nice to cruise over long distances on bits of highway. And actually I find it very similar to the Nissan Navara Warrior that I tested. That was a very interesting experience because that Nissan Navara had very uptuned suspension, and it sat a bit higher and all that, but I found just on those longer bits of road, they had a similar type of suspension feel, which just felt composed, but also, you know, nice and cushioned without feeling too busy because we have leaf springs on the rear. Now, something I'm very appreciative of is the fact that this car has disc brakes all around, and it doesn't just have drums on the rear and only discs at the front. So it just feels very current, and also that means the braking feels quite good. So say if we do an emergency last minute stop here, and nice work, pulls up pretty well. But then the thing is, obviously, because this is pretty light on the rear, you are going to get a bit of skinny on the rear end if you're not laden up. So yeah, that brings me on to the brake feel. So I found the brake feel to not be super bitey, and I was a little bit like, is that intentional? Of course it is, right? So if you're towing a big load behind you don't want those brakes to be super responsive, but you want to be able to sort of push them in gently and be able to, you know, safely come to a stop without sort of upsetting your whole ride. And that's exactly what these brakes do. Now, as for the noise, you can hear a bit of road noise because this thing's wearing those all-terrain tires. But to be honest, it's pretty quiet. Now, mid-range pickup's pretty good as well. So if you want to put your foot down, for example, this ute does feel like it's got a decent amount of pickup, but just it does have that four-cylinder sort of lackluster performance, where the V6, I could imagine, would be a very interesting pick because it's going to have a bit more torque and a bit more responsiveness in that way. Now, what else is dramatically different between this and other dual cab utes in this segment is the 10-speed automatic. So the 10-speed automatic I tested extensively in the Ford Ranger Raptor, loved it. Here, it's been pretty good. It doesn't really have any issues deciding which gear to be in. And then finally, wrapping up this road section through this twisty corner section, I find the Ford Ranger to be quite a lot of fun to drive through corners. It's good to throw around, the suspension stays nice and relatively flat. And like I mentioned, the fact this thing has leaf springs doesn't seem to upset this car at all. So we're here on our off-road proving ground, and it's time to test out the Ford Ranger Wildtrak. Now, again, I was wildly impressed with the Ford Ranger Raptor. That thing is purpose-built to just demolish any track it goes on. So this thing's meant to be doing two things. One, it's meant to be really good at going off-road like this, hence the Wildtrak name, branding, wheels, tires, all that sort of stuff. But it's also meant to be a practical ute. Rear-wheel drive most of the time when you're out on the road, but then we'll shift into 4-high, and that will allow us to go into 4x4 mode. Now, what I really like in this ute compared to all the other utes I've tested is that this thing has drive mode. So we can go through and we've got normal, we have eco, we have tow and haul mode, we also have slippery mode, we'll have mud ruts, and we also have sand mode, which is all very practical. So as we go down this hill, we're using hill descent control to sort of gently make our way down. I can use the throttle to sort of speed things up when I think it's appropriate to. That's excellent. I like that control a lot. I had a lot of trouble getting to hill descent control in the Nissan Patrol, which is a $100,000 vehicle, but here it's a one-touch button and away we go. Now, I feel like this ute is pretty composed along here. I don't feel like I'm being thrown around all that much, although the camera may see different things. Now, we're just cruising along this trail here. I can really feel the wheels doing a whole bunch of work while the body sort of stays still on top. Now, let's take it out of hill descent control. That was pretty good. Now, we're just in 4-high at the moment, just cruising through here. Now, I can definitely feel those leaf springs start to jitter around a little bit. That wasn't something that was going to be completely invisible, but it's not too bad. Look, it's not ideal, but it's still pretty decent, especially if you had to head somewhere off-road. You know you've got a pretty capable vehicle. Now, let's go through these mud ruts here. We got these like big dips that we can go down into. Nice. Like that quite a lot. Oh, there we go. Bit of off-camber work. Let's get working. Oh, nicely sort of squatting down a bit. Mince meat. Now that low end torque in this 4-cylinder that we have here is quite impressive. Now what's interesting that's just happened now is that, okay, right, so we have a front camera, which is extremely useful. Something I've said on a whole bunch of units I tested I really like to see. But what's weird is that it keeps shifting between a sort of compass mode and also the camera view. So I think the second you start going a bit off camber, it will give you your compass and orientation, but it's just jumping between those two modes. Let's see if I just press camera mode to lock it in camera mode. Okay, there we go. Now we got camera mode all around, but it's still shifting out of that. Weird. So the cameras are disconnecting and reconnecting through this screen, which I'm finding a bit annoying. I wish it would just keep on the camera feed all the time. Now, as we go down through here, this is all very easy work for the Wildtrak. I mean, it's called the Wildtrak, so you'd hope so. Now I'm going to bring it up to this sort of steep hill we're on here. I'm going to hold it, and then I'm going to just see what happens when we sort of put it into a little bit of throttle. Oh, that four-wheel drive system is quite good in just being able to put your power down. Now, I do like that front-facing camera because as we sort of go up in the air, I can see if there's any big obstacles below me or in front of me. Now, let's just put this thing into sand mode because I think that will be quite fun to sort of go through. Excellent. Now, as we go into sand mode, we've got our rear diff locker on now. We're in 4 high still. And we're just letting the car know that things might get a little bit slippery. So, as we go through here, this is a bit of a skinny section of the track. Always a bit of fun. Going through, easy. This unit's just making absolute mincemeat of this track here. Now we've got some rocks heading up. Got to make sure we stay nice and slow. Again, not a problem for the Wildtrak. I really like how the suspension has been tuned for this car, where it doesn't feel like the body's being thrown around all that much. It really feels like the chassis and the wheels and the suspension are doing all the work for me. And the body of the car is keeping relatively still, making it more confidence inspiring to go a bit harder off-road. You don't feel like you have a massive high center of gravity. And yeah, I just feel like this has a really nice planted feel off-road. Now, what this ute does really well is just the day-to-day stuff. It has great technology, excellent safety features, a really nice refined ride. Now, my only complaint would be this 4-cylinder diesel power plant. Look, it has enough power, but it just feels a little lackluster in its character. It's very much in line with what all the other dual cab utes are doing at this price point, and that's why I think a lot of people are lining up to get that V6 option. Now, thank you so much for watching. My name's Cameron. This is Product Review Cars. Make sure you go to productreview.com.au to review your own car there, because we'd love to hear your experience with your own vehicle.